Now for panel 5, quietly slipping in behind. Yesterday we heard about design of supply chains, changing organizations to support efficient supply chains, anticipating risks and disruptions, and innovation in supply chain businesses, which may sound like what an Australian would call blokey stuff. However, some of the best supply chains are run by women. And this morning's first panel will discuss the role of women driving supply chains. Again, the bios are all in the pack, and pretty impressive they are. The chairperson is Annette Clayton, Executive Vice President for Global Supply Chain at Schneider Electric. And Schneider are the sponsors of this morning's breakfast, so let me thank Schneider in advance for that. Annette, would you like to take your panel? Thank you.
Thank you. I think if the food is good, you can thank me. If it's not, we can blame John. That's my strategy. Well, welcome everyone to Influential Women Driving Global Supply Chains. It's really my honor to facilitate this distinguished panel of women, and I'd like to introduce them now, if I could. My fellow panelists are Air Vice Marshal Margaret Stabe, Commander Joint Logistics of the Australian Defence Force. Genevieve O'Sullivan, Director, General Material Systems and Supply Chain, National Defence Canada. Linda Bryant, VP Global Strategy and Business Excellence, Janssen Supply Group. Teresa Reinhardt, General Manager, Global Sourcing, Rio Tinto. And Pat McLagan, Principal McLagan International and President of Goldstreams. So it seems that we have a warm round of applause from our audience, and we haven't said much at all yet. So this is a good trend. Okay, so we've really come together today to talk about women in the supply chain. And I wanted to start by really sharing a few compelling facts and figures with all of you that I thought might set the stage for our dialogue. So achieving really gender balance in the business world, including supply chain, really isn't just a nice thing to do, but the future may actually depend on it. A few statistics that might interest you. Women represent the majority of educated talent in today's knowledge economy. From Arkansas to Abu Dhabi, the majority of university graduates are women. 60% of women are graduating from university in the United States and in Europe, and 70% of the graduates in the United Arab Emirates are women, 60% in Iran. Yet organizations still treat women as minorities. In 2010, women became 51% of the working population in the United States. And we know women make most of the purchasing decisions, from cars to computers to real estate to tourism. This was an interesting fact for me, and I wasn't aware of it until researching for this, but women actually are the majority of internet users and dominate the social media websites. And maybe the most compelling fact of all is that Fortune 500 companies that have more gender balance outperform their peers financially. So there is a business imperative here. So the questions we face is, why aren't there more women in the supply chain? So let's start out this morning by getting to know our panelists a bit better. And we thought we'd start by asking them to really describe the defining moments of their career, the decisions that they made that really shape the outcomes of their careers. And I'll give the panelists a few moments to prepare their thoughts and reflect myself. When I think about my defining moments, they were really what I would call special assignments, the dreaded special assignments. The assignments no one else wanted, high risk, high visibility, big stakes. And honestly, I didn't see it at the time, but these were opportunities to be noticed and to be recognized. The second was really deciding to be mobile. Big decisions, I think, especially for women who are facing marriage and child decisions. I decided to be mobile, and this opened, obviously, a lot more doors. And the third was taking stretch roles, roles that I wasn't prepared for, that maybe I didn't even have the experience to do, but that allowed me to learn to trust my instincts. So for me, these were the defining moments. And I'll just open it up to the panelists to see if we have any comments from our ladies.
So maybe I can say a few words about my defining moments. So I guess in some ways they weren't always conscious. It's more in hindsight, looking back at what happened and realizing how important some of those decisions or those moments were. Again, like yourself, I decided to be mobile, but mine wasn't a thoughtful, this will help my career decision. It was just a, wow, there's a whole big world out there, and isn't this really exciting? So when everybody else was saying, no, I don't want to go, I want to stay here with my friends or with my family, I was like, are you guys crazy? How good is this? You know, I want to go off. So for me, the driver was the interest. The driver of those special projects or putting your hand up was because they were interesting and they were exciting and they were challenging. And in some cases, I guess, one of the things that I did that I would encourage people to do is it doesn't have to be as big as a big assignment or a big project, but there are always those things that come up of, you know, we need a volunteer for this panel, we need a volunteer for this committee, you know, and to get yourself in those things increases your network, increases your visibility, increases your knowledge of what else is going on in the company, to give you more choices and more information to make those choices. Yeah. So I'd say those were, for me, defining moments. And then probably one other one that really did spur me on to be very determined to take a leap that I probably wouldn't have otherwise taken is I had moved from Canada, where I was born. After university, went to the UK. And I was working in the UK in the public sector for a couple of years. And I had gone and got my qualification in procurement and supply chain from CIPS. And I came back to my boss and I said, right, you know, I've got this now, so I'd like a raise. And I will never forget, he looked at me and he said, no young female foreigner is ever going to get any further here than you already have, so drop it. Right? So those are fighting words, aren't they? Yeah. And for me that was perfect, because I then went out the next day and applied for the job as his boss and got it.
Well done.
So, yeah, and there is no way I would have applied for that job, because I think, you know, one statistic, and I've probably got these numbers a bit wrong, but one statistic I do remember is that most men will apply for a job if they're about 25% qualified, and women won't even try for it unless they're at least 90%. There's no way I was 90% qualified for that job, but he spurred me on, so I need to thank him one day.
Any of our other panelists? Yes, Pat?
I'd like to piggyback on what Teresa said, because I hadn't actually thought to talk about this, but I think that my defining moments have been really in two categories. One is when I have really felt a need to take a great leap for personal reasons or for whatever. And the very first client that I actually had, and people asked me why I started there, was 3M Company. And I just decided, we had some financial problems in my family, and I decided that I had some things to offer. I didn't know exactly what, but I knew that I had a lot of confidence in myself and that there was a program I could run for 3M, and I called them. And when I was brought in, this is before there was any leadership development in that company. It was way back in the late 60s, so sort of letting you know how old I am. But in any event, they put me into the engineering side of the business. And the top engineering educator said to me, well, look, he said, you don't have a PhD. He said, I don't have anyone on my staff that doesn't have a PhD, and you're not going to make it here. And he said, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to put you on, your program is going to be run on Friday afternoons from 4:30 to 6.
Nice.
And then we ran the first program, and it was like standing room only, with people wanting to come, and we, you know, that sort of broke the ice. But in that same company, as I began to do work that people valued, I had one of my very first sponsors, and I think in my career I've had 3 or 4 male sponsors, not mentors. They didn't really coach me. They didn't do anything specific to help with my education or my career, except referring me to some very powerful people that then became clients and that really helped my career along. So it was really, the sponsorship has been for me really critical, and also having the challenge of somebody saying you can't do something is something that gets that either female or male energy really up, and then you move on.
Anyone else? Yes, Margaret.
I guess listening to my fellow panellists, in my early career there were surprises in terms of key defining moments. They weren't deliberate. But I worked in 2 roles as the staff officer. This is a bit military speak. I'll try not to do that too much. But advisors, a logistic advisor to one of our senior leaders. And at the time I didn't realise it, but I was being noticed. And if I trace it back, that was probably the first time that I was being considered to take on a role as an exchange officer in the United States Air Force. So a key defining moment for my career was in fact when I was selected to do that. And I found it one of the most daunting tasks in my life. I mean, going into the Pentagon, where there's 13,500 people, I mean, that's the size of my entire Air Force. So it was pretty daunting, and on the second day I thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? I need to go home. But it was the feeling of being really stretched, finding that I could mix it with these people and actually make a contribution. And it was just that sort of feedback to myself that was the key defining moment for me transitioning into senior leadership.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. Anyone else?
Well, I guess I think I probably have a bit of a different story from most people, because I'm of a generation where the Government of Canada was actively going out to seek francophone females. So I was working for a Minister of Cabinet at the time when I was invited to do an interview for an executive position in the Government of Canada for a Department of Government of Canada. I was 29 years old when I entered the bureaucracy at a senior executive level. It's vastly too young, and had the privilege of beginning a career in business transformation really at that point in time, coming into an organization in great desperation. So it was a humbling experience. I think more than anything what I learned was, first of all, to surround myself with people who were deeper and more knowledgeable than me. And I had the privilege of having found a professional coach, a Myers-Briggs coach, whom I brought actually into the organization as an employee for internal communications purposes. And she was about 65 years old at the time. Very, very cool woman. And she worked with our organization to put in place total quality management for us. And she taught me reams and reams of stuff. And as a female francophone with management experience, I got pushed through the system without any coaching, without any mentoring, without any training. So anything that I learned, it was by dint of sheer determination, until the point where they basically told me that I was to become an ADM or a deputy minister over time, something I knew very clearly that I didn't want to do, simply because it's such political positions, and because it meant a lifestyle that didn't appeal to me. And the other significant piece was that the Public Service of Canada was not a learning environment. It wasn't an environment where you could do deep dives into knowledge and master areas that I was interested in, like business transformation, in order to be able to be more than just a sort of figurehead. And so I took 2 years to plan my exit and left for the private sector on an executive interchange, basically to learn consulting. I considered it a master's degree in consulting. And after that, started up my own business. And then it's a client of mine who hired me back into the public service to do supply chain, which I have no background in. So in effect, I probably have had a very sort of unusual path. But I would say that there are a couple of things that were tremendously deeply important to me. And that has been to draw and cultivate outstanding people, much brighter, much more capable and knowledgeable than I around me, who have been my guides, and they're male and female. And also to have recognized and been comfortable with my own lack of knowledge or weakness, going into organizations and bringing myself through a process of learning. So it's a high risk, but in today's transformation world, you're always on the edge of knowledge. And so to learn to live on the edge of knowledge is a sort of critical asset, and to be open to the discovery that comes as a result of that. So for me, that's...
Thank you. Thank you. Anything to add, Linda, or shall we go on?
No, let's go on.
Okay, let's go on. Well, I think the key themes you heard was mobility, really stretch assignments, and in some cases, leaping into challenges we weren't completely prepared for. Kind of the common themes. Really, where we wanted to go next was we get often asked as women, tell us the secret to success. Would you please write down the formula? We'd like to copy it and repeat it. And so that's a very challenging question, and so we thought maybe to provide some small insight to that, we would share with you maybe each panelist share a few experiences, briefly, that shaped our careers, experiences that really prepared us for where we are today. And again, I'll start to give our panelists a few moments to think about the question. For me, it was really a large operational role, a role where I could no longer feel and touch and specifically communicate to every person that worked for me. It taught me things like alignment, things like communications, really the power of lean and lean manufacturing, which became sort of a strong tool in my particular toolbox. Strategic roles where I was responsible for not just the tactical execution, but really bringing thought leadership. And as I think about one of the things that I rely on most today, it's really that strategic leadership. And then at one point in my career, I actually ran a P&L, which is a bit different for a lot of supply chain leaders, but I ran a P&L. And today, that helps me a lot with my business unit partners who are running P&L, because one, I understand what it's like to be in their shoes, and I'm often maybe a bit more compassionate to their particular challenges of running a P&L. So I'll open that concept up to the panelists, and we're looking for a few experiences that prepared you for your very senior roles today.
First of all, I think the concept of having a secret sauce is certainly a fallacy. I mean, there is no secret sauce. I mean, essentially, you have to learn to take risk. And I think a lot of people who articulated on the panel, you walk into spaces where you're not absolutely fluent, and you're willing to learn there. So it's important to surround yourself with people who are very, very bright. I think Genevieve pointed that out. And not to be afraid to say that you don't know. Because people, if you acknowledge that you don't know and you're willing to learn fast and work very hard, people will take you in on that. I think the other thing that's important is to understand what you actually want. I know very early in my career, before I understood the full impact of succession planning, I had a conversation with my boss and my boss's boss about what my next 3 career moves would be. And I listened, I was very careful to listen and understand what they were saying. And then I pointed out, that's really not where I see myself, my next 3 moves. So I'd like to do this, this, and this, instead of what you articulate as your plan for me. So I went on to talk about what I was interested in. I needed some more financial and business acumen and how I was going to get that. So I went back to my boss's office. He said, do you know what you just did? No one goes into succession planning at your level and says what they want to do. You say, yes, thank you for rating me in this space, and then you do it. I said, well, quite frankly, I don't want your job. I don't want his job. So I thought I should let you know pretty early in my career. 25 years later, he was still in that same space. So if I'd taken his advice, I would have gotten nowhere. So it's really important for you to understand exactly what's going to work for you, and then be willing to take whatever risk and whatever sacrifices you have to make it work for you.
I guess one of the early encounters I had, did anyone do some of the management training with John Cleese? Some of the videos? Okay. And there was one that was called Goya. So he had this beautiful painting by Goya. And it actually stood for Get Off Your Ass. And it was about go and talk to people, go and ask people, go and persuade people. And I have found that as an enduring experience, because that's what we do in supply chain, right? We work with other people. And unless you get out of your office and go and talk to people and find out what's going on, you won't get anywhere. So that was one. And another key defining experience, I guess, was back, about 8 years ago, I actually resigned. And the Chief of the Air Force at the time, for the Australians in the audience, was Air Marshal Angus Houston. And he hounded me. He kept saying, why are you leaving? You know, why do you want to leave? We see a future for you. We see you doing this, this and this. And like Linda was saying, I said, well, I don't see myself doing that at all. But then it was a sort of almost a stroke of genius in hindsight. I actually identified a particular role that I would like to do. And he had said, well, we never even thought about that for you. But, gosh, that makes sense. All right, let's do that. So I unresigned, and the rest is history.
Okay. Any other comments, or shall we move on?
I think for me, I don't think there's many, there is no secret sauce to your point. I don't think there's many ingredients in the sauce, even if it did exist, which are very particular to women. I think, most of what makes you successful, most of what we're talking about is things that everybody should do. I think that maybe some of the things that are a little particular to women are that having the confidence to do it. I think that men in the workplace are more confident just because there's more of them. And when you're the majority, you feel more comfortable. And I've lived most of the last 12 years in Asia. And when you're the majority, you feel more comfortable. When you're the minority, you feel less comfortable. Until you get used to it. And I think maybe that's part of what the successful women have, which is they've got used to that feeling and they've got some confidence now about it. And they have the confidence to say, no, that's not what I want to do. They have the confidence to say, you know what, I've had enough feedback, thank you very much, I don't need any more today. Because I think there is a tendency to give more feedback to women in the workplace, and for women to feel like that they need to do better, they need to do better. I think that is definitely a female thing, that women maybe feel like they need to fix everything and some things can't just be left alone. And as you get a little more confident, I think you realize, you know what, feedback's a great gift, and knowing what feedback to act on and which to leave alone is actually a comfortable space to be in.
Any other key experiences?
I think when I started my business in the late 60s, I just had so much passion about what I wanted to do. And I am aware, looking back, that the passion sort of blinded me to some of the biases that were around me. Okay, because you think back in the late 60s, I mean, there really were very few women doing a lot in management and leadership. And I just think I was sort of unaware. And I saw my fellow women out doing things like Betty Friedan, the first generation of people that were out there lobbying and marching and all of that stuff. And I thought, that's not me. I just want to do what I love to do, and I want to do it in a space where I can make a difference. But I think looking back also, it took a bit of a toll. And I think one of the things that I did that was really sort of life-saving for me is I pulled myself out frequently. And you talk about, having someone work with you in the MBTI, and just to kind of retreat into workshops or go out into nature or do something that just helped me kind of get my perspective again, so that I could go back. And that may not be something that's so unique to women, because I think everyone has to do that. I think when you're in an organization, the pressure, almost the patriarchal authoritarian pressure, it hits everyone. So, and thankfully institutions are changing, and we talked about that yesterday, but I think we need to remember that we're not just people working in an organization. We're people with purpose, with passion, and with a life, and we need to retreat out from time to time to just get our perspective. But I think that's been a life-saving kind of renewal thing for me.
I'm going to not talk so much about an experience, but an observation as I'm listening to us, and that is sort of, I wonder if women fundamentally don't have a strategic advantage with males. Because a male-to-male relationship has protocols and rule structures that are pretty clear. But when they engage with a female, you actually have much more power than you think you have. Because the rule structures aren't so clear. And when you come across with clarity, intelligence, presence, and force, it is something that they have to adjust themselves internally to. So I don't want to speak on behalf of all males, and I'm not universalizing or globalizing. But I've seen it, and certainly amongst the dear generals with whom I work, that there is an opportunity to open up a different kind of dialogue as a woman, simply because you can disarm. And and it's part of the beauty of gender difference. So I don't see that as a negative thing. It's part of what opens up a dialogue that's of a different nature and that frees everybody to set new rule structures. So I think that we need to, well, at least it's been my experience. It can go either way, but I don't believe that that's been a handicap.
I think one of the challenges, to address something that Teresa said, is feedback. Because I believe it's very difficult for women to get, for anyone actually, but especially women, to get candid feedback from males. Men are, to your point, it's difficult for them because the protocol is not defined to say what's the appropriate protocol and context in which I can give this feedback to women. So it's important, if you're a female or anyone that's an other in a relationship, that you open yourself for that dialogue and make it a safe space for people to give you candid feedback, because it's a gift and it's very difficult to get.
And I would say that for anybody who's giving it, you know, whether you're giving it to, in part of the issue is that women are in a minority. If you're giving it to any minority group at all, is focus on the job, focus on the purpose. Don't focus on how do I give feedback to women, how do I give feedback to my Chinese staff, how do I give feedback to my, over 60 staff. Just focus on what is the feedback I want to give in order to help this person be better at their job. And I think if you go about it that way, then that'll be a positive experience for both of you.
So I say we try to turn the knob just a little bit to become politically incorrect. I think this spice it up a little bit, and I'll just plant this seed, and we'll see how our panelists respond to this. There was a recent interview in the Wall Street Journal with Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric, and he was giving advice to women, and it's some of it may be interesting to talk about. One was laser-like focus on performance. I think that's probably universal advice. The second one was maybe a bit more controversial. Mentoring programs are bad ideas. Everybody should be mentoring, and specific mentoring programs for women, bad ideas. There's no such thing as work-life balance, just life choices, right? And lastly, women's employee groups can be like victims units, and the best women avoid them, all right? So I'll plant that seed, and I know many of you are working in companies that obviously have networking groups, have mentoring programs specifically for women, and your respective companies are trying to help your organizations have women represent more of your workforce, specifically in supply chain. But I'll just kind of pause there and take your thoughts on Jack's controversial comments.
So maybe I'll kick off, which is I actually agree with some of his comments, right? So pick up the work-life balance one. Whether it's life choices or work-life balance, I think, you can use whatever nomenclature you like. I think that, Lydia, you said about you need to make choices. You do need to make choices, but I think that, most of the world now is kind of a 24-hour clock, or at least at least work-life balance doesn't mean you do home stuff until 9 and you do work stuff 9 to 5 and then you do home stuff from 5 o'clock onwards. So I think it is about just mixing it up and finding the mix that works for you. And I've had some fabulous feedback from some team members over the years. I worked in Singapore years ago and had a member of staff who had twins. And I have worked most of my working life with team members reporting to me who don't sit in the same geography as me. So I am very, very comfortable with not having to walk out my door and see all of my team lined up at their desk at 9 o'clock, which is actually great. And I thought it was just normal. I've realized that's actually something some people are uncomfortable with. So I think it's a great skill. If any of you don't have it, get it. But the point for this was that this woman who had twins desperately wanted to come back to work. And our companies don't always facilitate people being able to come back or to leave or take life choices or breaks easily. That's fine. She worked incredibly hard. Her output was fabulous. I didn't want to lose her. And she had great potential. She used to come in at 10 o'clock. I have no problem with that at all. She came in at 10. She worked late. She put in the hours, she put in the time, and what really mattered is she did the results and her customers loved her internal customers. But her choice was, in the morning, she wanted to get up, feed her children, play with them, dress them, and then go to work. In the evening, her husband was a teacher, so it was okay for him to pick them up from daycare or whatever. And that worked for her. And I think, having that flexibility, even myself, when I checked in this morning, I've given them my tennis bag because I'm going to play tennis, at the end of work. And then I'll go home and I'll jump on a conference call. So for me, that is work-life balance because I'm getting what I need. That woman was getting what she needed. But you're going to have to put the puzzle together in a different way these days. So I think that one. The other one I'd like to take up is you said about, was it women's networks?
Women's employee groups can be like victims units.
I actually agree with that. I have been to a few and I do avoid them like the plague because it's a whole bunch of women sitting around staring at each other saying, how come we're not treated equally? And I think what we've all talked about is there are choices that we need to make to do things different and to step out and to just be great and focus on the job. And I think also if you're trying to make a difference, you don't just focus on the people who are experiencing the problem, right? You go back 100 years ago when women wanted the vote, women sitting around in little rooms in Victorian days talking about how much they wanted the vote didn't get them the vote, right? Convincing some men that there were good business reasons, socioeconomic reasons to do this got them the vote because the men made the rules and the men were in parliament and had to vote to change the law. So if we really want to make a change, whether we're women or any other minority, it's really about engaging and talking about the business purpose and the business drivers and how we will be more successful and working with, in this case, men to get them to buy in and understand that there are some great business reasons that they want to facilitate. So I think that, I do kind of agree with that, actually.
Okay, Jack Welch giving women advice? Really?
Thank you, Linda.
Okay, so, I agree with 50% of what Jack said, and, even a watch that's broken is right 50% of the time. So, it's really. So I agree with work-life balance. I mean, I think it is choices, and it's obvious, okay, laser focus, who can't figure that out? But in terms of women's group, I'll tell you the experience in Johnson & Johnson. In 1995, the Women's Leadership Initiative was formed. The number of directors and above at Johnson & Johnson would fill half this room. Fast forward 10 years later, after that initiative was started, we had to have 3 different conferences for women's leadership because there were so many women leaders in J&J because there was an election to focus on it. That was led by the single woman we had on the executive committee. It was a WLI, and no one was allowed to come in a room and moan about what they couldn't do. When women wanted to vote and people of color wanted to vote in the U.S., they died for it. So I think women need to make sure that they fight for what they get, and women's leadership groups have been very effective in doing that. So if you're going to a WLI initiative that is not where people sit around and moan,
WLI is Women's
Leadership Initiative, or any any employee resource group that is ineffective, then make it effective. I think there are common, if corporations learn to manage women's issues, they manage issues of lots of people. Look at millennials. They want the same flexibility in their schedules that we've talked about women of childbearing age want. So if you can get it right for women, you can get it right for young people, you can get it right for lots of other people. So the question for corporations is not, what do women have to do? And the question for Jack is not what women have to do, but what do we have to do in corporations to make them inclusive and therefore make them better places for everyone to work?
And I think it's quite important because we're dealing with a mainstream group versus marginalized group issue here. And while I believe that it's up to women to have their passion and pursue with dogged determination what we want and need, organizations are suffering because there are too few women and minorities, quite frankly, in the mainstream. So I think organizations need to step back and say, what can we do to facilitate the movement, the faster movement? And we've got to be able to do that. I know at General Electric many years ago, they noticed that there were not enough engineers and female engineers coming into the workplace. And they knew that they had to start at the very beginning, getting into the universities, nurturing women into the universities, providing scholarships and so on. It took them 10 years to really create a better balance. But that was a long-term initiative on the part of the company to begin to redress that kind of issue. So I think another thing, the more diverse, this is just a fact of social interaction, the more diversity we have, the more conflict there's going to be because people are coming from different perspectives, have different styles. And I think that's frightening for people who would rather have a little bit more homogeneity. But conflict and diversity are really, really good for innovation, for change, for speed of response. Mm-hmm. So we should welcome diversity, female and all sorts of diversity as a stimulus to helping us accelerate ourselves into the generation of that smart company that we were talking about yesterday. Mm-hmm. So it's a really, really wonderful opportunity for organizations now. Now let's dive in and create a new mainstream for the future.
Annette, I might just make an observation following on from that. We've got to build, and certainly in my organisation, the compelling case and it's for diversity, because it will make a better team, innovation, all those things, Pat, you just said. But I've come to observe that one of the problems we have, and it's particularly the women who have done this to ourselves, is that we have spent so much effort and so much passion about being equal. Don't notice me because I'm a female, just notice me for the work I have done. Just exactly the same. In my world, we all wear the same. And that now it's really hard to reconcile the compelling case for diversity, because now you're saying, oh, do notice me because I am different, because I think differently, I have a different contribution, to this, decades of I'm just equal, don't treat me any different. And certainly in our organisation, that is a real dilemma now, because the women, it's a huge backlash. They don't want to be singled out. They just want to go under the radar. And it's certainly a dilemma that we are facing in the Australian Defence Force.
It's a question I'd like to just ask my colleagues here on the panel is, do you see that, or do you feel that? If my personal experience is, I definitely spent years saying, I'm equal, I'm the same, I'm exactly the same, don't look at me any differently. I think now that I've got a bit older and a bit more confident, I'm like, you know what, actually we are different, and here's the ways that I can contribute differently, and here's the ways that you can contribute, and together we make it great. Do you see people changing their views of not admitting, recognizing and actually celebrating differences to be stronger companies, or do you still see people very much the same? And the reason I ask is I work in a mining company, and so the fact that we're even having this discussion now is a big change. It's a very male world.
I've never actually worked in a female world.
I don't think any of us have, yeah.
But the kinds of organizations, Agriculture Canada, Natural Resources Canada, Spine Citizens Canada, National Defence, Justice, Transport, these are all male worlds. And there are, I think traditionally, certainly, the overwhelming pressure was to become a man, a female man. And when I was pregnant twice at executive tables in the Government of Canada. Now, that gave me the same paunch as many of the males around the table, so it wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but for different reasons. But that in itself, and Margaret, you lived this as well, you could sense the malaise, because you cannot deny somebody's femininity when they're pregnant. It's a fact of life. But I think that increasingly, women that I see around me are less afraid today to take on that space, and I think there is increasing acceptance. Except that I also believe that we have lost traction of women, certainly in the bureaucracy and executive levels, and that women coming into the positions now are not properly coached and mentored. And that I have a number of mentees and coachees, some of which are men, by the way, and some of which are women. I spend a lot of time with the women talking about relationship management. Spend a lot of time coaching them through dominant relationships, how they position themselves in those relationships, how they engage the conversation safely. Those kinds of things are still very much going on today. And I actually, though networks can be dysfunctional because they're networking, because their objective is to network rather than a productive outcome. I think any group of people you bring together with productive intent, as opposed to just meeting each other and complaining, can drive things out. I think it behooves any woman in an executive position today to actively go out and coach and mentor younger women, if only to tool them in ways that we weren't tooled, if only to provide them with an opportunity to have a safe place to discuss and discover how they can manage things differently. It's a tough world, and we're globalizing. And all the things that we're talking about here reflect back to the conversation we had yesterday, which is about creating agility, which is about creating integration. Modern working environments, as Teresa was saying, I've been an executive manager since 1987. I had people working from home back then. It's all trust related. But you can't get to where we're going without Skype. You can't get to where we're going without dynamic models. There are no time zones, but there are families, and there are ways of integrating these things healthily. It's in attitude, trust, and leadership that you achieve that.
Very good. Thank you. Well, I thought it would be appropriate at this point, sounds like breakfast is mostly over, to turn it over to the audience. And I actually, in order to motivate you to ask controversial questions, I have an award for the most politically incorrect question. And so I'll be the judge as we venture through this, but really looking forward to your questions, and feel free to direct them to the broader panel or to a specific member.
Okay, first, well done to the ladies. So you've been trailblazers in your respective fields, so well done. So I'm Ampy. I'm the Vice President of Logistics for Unilever. And I do see a lot of concerns of women in organizations. My question is specific to how do we create a gender-balanced organization? You spoke about the business imperative, and I think that is really the case for gender-balanced organization. There's a strong war for talent, and if we're wanting to attract the millennials, then we need to be able to create an organization that will then support that, because where millennials are coming from, they wanted to grow personally and professionally as well, not just in one dimension. My question is to Pat, actually. The organizations today, the corporate organization today, if I would then borrow some of the words used a while ago, was actually built by Jack. What would the organization be like if it were an organization built by Jack and Jill? Because I think there is really a bias because the organizations, and this is not by design, but because it was built by men, it is in a way structured in that way. Now, if we wanted to create a gender balanced organization, how would it be looking like if it were a joint design?
I think that the conversations we had yesterday pretty much point out the direction that we need to go. It's the direction that the supply chain and the value network world is taking us. It's a more horizontal, fluid organization, one where you're not thinking about your job in terms of 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week or 60 hours a week, but rather in terms of what you're producing, providing, delivering, how you're adding value. It allows us to have people that are working away from us. I think in order for us to actually create tomorrow's organization and be successful, we've got to go in that direction. And I think automatically that's going to attract a whole variety of people that are turned off by authoritarian, high control, high power focused, domination power focused organizations. Those organizations don't work very well anymore anyway. And what you're all doing in this room is going to fundamentally transform it. I think we're going to see a flood of people coming in from the more non-traditional arenas, women who are going out and starting their own businesses instead of coming into big institutions. We need that entrepreneurial thought. We need that entrepreneurial energy. So I really think that it's happening, and the economy is sort of driving it. The world is driving it. The communication systems are driving us to a new form of organization that's going to be the organization of Jack and Jill, I think.
One of the specific issues, if you think about the corporate calendar as it relates to gender, so when corporations are identifying key talents, typically it's when people are in their late 20s, early 30s. So that's the time when they're asking for high positions, lots of hours, very little work-life balance, mobility. And that's the exact time when many women are making decisions about children, decisions about marriage, decisions that could impact that. And so some companies, the most successful companies, are really making it so that women can come back into the workforce, can make these decisions and not get off the key talent track, because it was built primarily for men. And that's one of the ways that we see some companies successful at helping specifically gender balance. Any other comments, or shall we take another question? Yes, please.
I have the next question, and then I think this will fit the bill that you asked for.
Okay, excellent. You're going to win. I can see it in your eyes.
Because of statistical disparity in the U.S., there's some rather controversial legislation pending to legislate equal pay for same jobs. And the question I'd like to address to the panel is, can you actually legislate fairness, or is this something that has to happen through an evolutionary process?
Well, I'll let the other women respond, but I would want equal pay for equal results. I'm not sure how everyone else feels, but my personal view is legislating it probably opens some doors. One of the things we see in a lot of European boards now is they need to be 40% women. So is that mandate going to make the board stronger? I'm not quite sure. But I would expect equal pay for equal performance. I'll open it up to the rest of the panel.
I'll make a short comment. I think you can legislate around behaviour, but you can't legislate around people's feelings and intent. So it's a two-edged sword. You can control bad behaviours through legislation, but you can't make people behave properly.
I think I totally agree with that. I think if you look at the UK, and I can't remember when it was it 1968 or 69 when they brought in equal pay for the same jobs. And people, roam the streets and were picketing and everything else, saying this will never work. And I think probably, in the beginning it probably didn't work. In the beginning it probably had a backlash effect of, okay, well then we're not going to hire women. Because we're not going to pay them equal pay, and then they're going to go off and get pregnant, and I have to pay their maternity cover and all of this. But I guess you need to start somewhere. And what it does do is gets people in the right frame of mind. Now, it may take time for society to then figure out how do you effectively work, not just to the letter of the legislation, but effectively to run good businesses and good employment practices and get the value out of it. But I think it's a good starting point. It puts up the signals that starts the conversation and gets people who believe a change is necessary to stand up and make a change, and people who believe that there are ways that this could go off the rails to stand up and not let it go off the rails.
I just want to support what she's saying, because in effect, if you were doing a business transformation or a human transformation, just even an individual, one of the first things that you do is to help the person see that future state and encourage them to, right off the bat, start acting as though they were in that future state, right? So when you are doing process modeling and redesigning a process, the value is bringing everybody into the room for that discovery process so they can experience the newness and the freedom of acting out of a different model. And most times, people leave the room already acting out of the new model before it's even implemented because they were part of a process and because the markers were put in place. So sometimes those have to be provocative external markers. And sometimes you have to, it may not be legislated forever, maybe over time it gets absorbed. But you have to force humanity into a future state to get them to align their internal state to the desired external state. And we know that's the dynamic of a person, it's the dynamic of an organization, and it's the dynamic of a family. So even though we might not like the fact that we have to do that, these kinds of moves assist us in all coming onto the same page, and the internal shifts as the external does.
I say shame on organizations for letting it get to that point. Because on what basis can you justify, if someone is doing the same job, paying them less? And I think it goes back to the early days when labor unions came into being. Shame on organizations for allowing that kind of situation to exist. And so where is leadership? And where is the value and ethical system of the organization that allows any kind of discrimination to happen? So I think these legislation things are a sign that something has gone wrong in the decision processes in organizations. That's how I feel about it.
Thank you for that question. It's good. Very good. Yes.
Roddy Martin, CCI. And I'm going to make a run for that politically inastute question.
Not too competitive.
That's right.
I'm going to start with a story. And I did a lot of work with a Latin American leadership team. And at the end of a 5-day strategy session, everybody was hugging and kissing everybody else. This organization's headquarters is in Battle Creek, Michigan. I asked them, how on earth does this leadership team get away with this kind of behavior in the United States, where we've gone completely overboard with regards to even getting near to anybody? So my question is, how on earth do you deal with these geographic differences, legal differences? Because there's chemistry between people. And what leadership implications does this have? And how does this scare women off from getting up to these levels and getting involved in this hugely sensitive discussion?
That's a really good one. When I just recently joined a French company, and there's a lot of kissing in a French company. But interestingly enough, it's a French company that's become very global. And one of the things that they've realized is that maybe the ways of France aren't the ways of the world. And so they've actually discouraged that because it makes some cultures, feel uncomfortable. And so you find some different behaviors. I mean, when I'm in France, I'm kissing, and when I'm in Europe, I'm not. And it seems like we've kind of found the right place. I'm not sure that it's really changing the dynamics as much as maybe you articulated, but I'll let the rest of the panel weigh in on that.
Well, I have a global staff. And they sit in Belgium, they sit in South America, they sit in the U.S., Italy. So we have kissing protocols. Every one of my staff kisses someone, but in Belgium it's 3 kisses. In Italy it's 2. In France it's 2. The Italians start on the left side. You know, the Belgians start on the right. So we have kissing protocols that we've set up so we all understand. But we've agreed that we will kiss, even my U.S. staff. So, the only issue that we have is, do you have to be on the geographical, is it in Belgium where you do 3, or can you do 3 to a Belgium in the U.S.? So we have those kinds of discussions. but in terms of, we just don't care. There's so much work to be done. So, I will ask, if someone reacts negatively, we'll ask if you want to be out of the kissing zone, and we honor that. But, we try to be very open about that. But we understand we're cross-cultural, and we try to embrace, the norms of the entire team.
I think I want to make your question a little more controversial.
This is a real competition we got going.
And go to the subtext of the question rather than the text of the question. So the underpinning of the question that I heard is, what of sexual dynamics in the workforce? So I'm going to take it from 2 points of view. One is going to be from my 2 sons' point of view and the way they talk to me about it. And the other is, Karina, with your permission, from a military point of view. And so I'm going to start with the military point of view, and I apologize, Karina, I won't reveal any secrets. As you can imagine, the military world is a male world. And the importance of socializing after an event, whether it's a deployed event, an educational event, or whatever, is in French, primordial. It's essential. It's fundamental to military life. And you get defined by how well you do that. You get labeled by whether you do it too well or not well enough. And it's almost impossible to avoid the sexual politics of interaction in that military environment. The only way that you can achieve it is by personal self-management protocols that signal very clearly and cleanly exactly where you're at, and usually those protocols, the responsibility for those protocols, typically in a military environment, reside with the woman, not the man. Okay? So that, I think, is a raw truth of the workforce. So I'm using military because it's such a vibrant example, and I don't think anybody in the room can deny it. Plus, it's a high-intensity sport. It's like anything that you do with high intensity in deployed ops, where you're intimately attached to people by the hip and rely on them for your life, and naturally human emotions engage. So that really is a place where we have to really be attentive, and let's not deny it. Then my 21-year-old son, who is what we call in Canada, for those of you who are Canadians, an homme rose. Doesn't translate well into English, it says pink man. But what it means is a male with heightened sensitivity to women's needs, and who interacts with women in a socially aware way, who tells me that at his level of the kids he knows, don't be naive, Mom. All men have the same agenda. Okay? So now he doesn't say this with any evil intent. What he's basically saying is, and what he says is, as a result of that, when I'm interacting with a female of my peer group, I'm extremely attentive to the signals I'm sending out. He has a girlfriend, a partner, and he's always alert to what signals he's sending her. But he has taken upon himself, as a modern-day male, to self-manage that interaction and to ensure that the way in which he communicates with women is respectful and sends no other signal except professional acceptance. So I think my answer to your question is, it's up to each of us And you make that choice. And let's not kid ourselves, life is a sexual game. So if that sexual power exists, somebody in that relationship is letting it exist. And it should be a two-way street.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
Any other comments on that particular question?
I guess the only other thing I'd like to add is you also asked what's the role of leadership in this question. And I think that from my perspective, the role of leadership is, and maybe a little bit of what you and your team have done, Linda, is to just put the issue on the table so that people don't hide from it. I don't think you need to give all the answers. You know, I think people will find their own answers. People will self-manage. But I think what you do as a leader is make sure that people don't, that it's not the elephant in the room. That you put it out there. We are a global team. We all work together. Different people have different cultures and different habits. Be aware, you know, discuss it if you want. Be aware, look for body signals. Just make sure you don't make anybody uncomfortable. And we can all, you know, live in that gender world, and we can also all say Merry Christmas as well, because that drives me crazy when we talk about political correctness. But, you know, again, it's about just make people comfortable and be aware. That's what I say is the leadership role. No further than that, really.
Very good.
You know, this might be, this really is a topic that is going to come more and more into play, because sex, power, I mean, this is the juicy underbelly of the human condition. And it exists in a ramped up way when you have power over situations. And I think all of us, I'm sure that all of us on the panel have stories that we could tell, and tell over our drinks, you know, in the bar, about very uncomfortable situations that have come with the innuendo that there's something at the other side of this, if only something will happen. So, you know, it's very, very, very important that that awareness that you're talking about become extremely conscious. You know, that's part of creating a conscious organization. Fully conscious organization takes responsibility for these things. And if we're going to have more women, our daughters, our granddaughters, our sons in the workplace, and create this Jack and Jill organization, we're not going to, don't shove it under the counter, because that's the worst thing we can do. We all know from the Victorian era, whenever you shove any of this stuff under the counter, it actually comes up in really powerful ways someplace else. So, I think I'm really glad that you picked up on that subtext. And Roddy, thanks for raising it.
I mean, my closing comment would be that leaders better walk the talk, because I've worked in organizations where leaders don't walk the talk, and that's where the trouble really starts.
Okay, well, we've warmed it up a bit. Maybe we can see if we can catch on fire here.
Yeah, this is Jeff Baum from Manhattan Associates. First one is I need some advice from a situation that happened 20 years ago with me. And then secondly, a question. So about 20 years ago, I was in a large sales campaign in Detroit, and it was a large audience, and a woman headed up a very large operation for one of the, at that time, the big three. And I was getting pushed on delivering a project in a short period of time, and I just said, there's no way we can do it. What you're asking for is 9 women to have a baby in a month. And this is 20 years ago. And she took that comment as very inappropriately, and then used the opportunity to tell us, all us men, in the audience where we didn't know about childbearing and we shouldn't use that. So to this day, I've never used that. And I was taken aback because I had my early career in Hewlett-Packard, which was very, very good company in the 80s to focus on gender and on race and very equal opportunity. So I just would like to get some advice on the panel. 20 years later, should we not, as men in the audience, very inappropriate to use that, what would be the reaction? But I was just curious. But the main thing was, is as you transact around the world in multinationals and Western-based companies, we generally we know it should be gender neutral and equal opportunity for our employees. What countries or what specific situations have you had to adjust what may not be right for you as a multinational to work in the local countries? You know, as we work around Asia and certain countries, have you had to adjust your employment policies to accommodate women in or out specifically, just that goes against what you've kind of been used to?
Well, I think we'll divide those in two. One is to give you career advice, a bit late, I suppose, but a bit late, but to give you the career advice. I mean, you know, my personal reaction to that was there's probably more diplomatic ways to say it. And not to be probably in a large audience, I'm not sure I would take that extremely well either. So, I mean, I think there are just better ways to say, to deliver your message than that particular way. I mean, I didn't find it particularly offensive, but I didn't find it all that. What's the reaction of the panel? Better ways to say it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it goes for women too. So, you know, I myself had a similar situation where I made a comment which I thought was very innocuous and in the context of the moment or what have you, and it was related to pregnancy as well. And I tell you, the lawsuit took 2 years to clear. Right? So my 2 pieces of advice would be, one is, look for better ways to say it. The other is know your audience, right? Because that's, the comment I made was, I think, even less controversial than that one. And probably could have said it in 100 rooms with no reaction and no offense whatsoever. But it didn't know my audience, and in that room, it didn't work. So, yeah, just be a bit careful, particularly in a multicultural context.
My question to you is, would you have used the same example if she had been a man?
You know, I learned it from my boss, and I used it.
Okay,
and he used it.
Yeah.
And just at that time, I've been very, from the reaction at that time, and we didn't win the deal either. So you always want to learn from your losses. So I haven't used it at all. But,
well, we have a.
You know, honestly, probably wouldn't. I just at that time I didn't think it was a sexist comment.
Well, let's take a quick poll because we have, you know, a statistical sample of 6 here. Let's take a quick poll in the audience. By show of hands, how many people would advise not to use that particular example? By show of hands. Yeah, so it's, I would say it's about
early 90s.
Yeah, I'd say it's about 60% of the room. It wasn't unanimous in the room, by the way, which is interesting in itself, right?
I mean, it's hard to take umbrage. It's kind of a provocative visual effect, right? But still, it really is more about how do you create a neutral territory. I mean, that's really what you're trying to do.
So the second half of your question, which was also, I think, an important question, was have we found across cultures differences in women? And actually, I have one of my colleagues here that runs India. He's got a number of very talented women that he is moving through the organization, and his biggest concern is when their husband calls them to say, work's over, you're no longer working, we need you at home, and you're not part of that organization anymore. And it's a reality that he's facing in driving high potential women. And I think that's one example that I'm seeing on it. I don't know if you can share other examples.
So we've just made a whole bunch of changes, very, very relevant, and I've actually been very involved in our company in doing it. So a couple of examples I can give you are here in Singapore, which is where I live at the moment. The maternity cover for women is 16 weeks if you're Singaporean. It's something like 4 if you're a foreigner. Mm-hmm. Right? It's 0 if you're not married.
Wow.
Yeah. So as a company, we decided that we treat everybody equally, and we have revised our in-company policy here in Singapore to say that all women who are pregnant in the company will get 16 weeks paid leave. And then they may take their holiday, and then they may take unpaid leave up to a year, because in Australia and Canada you can have a year off. So we won't pay for it because that's not how the culture and everything works here. However, we will give you the same opportunity if you want, and you can take unpaid up to a year. So we've tried to look across the globe, not only within the microcosm of Singapore, and say we want to treat everybody equally, and you don't have to be married either. The other thing that we've done is looked at paternity leave, so when men want to take off family leave, and I think in most of our Western countries, and particularly in Europe, I think we give 4 days or something, so again, we've made that universal. We've looked at healthcare, we've looked at the issue in India and just kind of made people aware and said, you know what, how can we help that? We can help it by recognizing that it exists. We can help it by saying, you know what, I would rather get 3 years of fabulous work and contribution from a fabulous team member than say, well, because she might not be around later, therefore I will avoid her at all costs. And then we've tried to work on this onboarding and offboarding, and how do we make sure that we leave it open to bring people back? So we're not a company anymore, I think we used to, that has the, once you leave us, we don't want to talk to you anymore. We would gladly welcome you back with all your knowledge and expertise. And then the other thing we're trying to do is do talent management on a regular basis. So the point you made about, you know, in your 20s and 30s, well, this isn't just a women issue with people coming back in their 30s and 40s and 50s and maybe them wanting to drive a career, but as our population gets older, it's actually a real issue with any part of our diversity. So those are some of the things that we're doing in, you know, real tangible things.
I think in order for corporations to be successful in all markets, cultural competency is so critical to develop. And you have to go in with intention and understanding to be able to meet the needs of that marketplace. So as an example, Johnson & Johnson wanted to recruit sales reps in Saudi Arabia, female sales reps in Saudi Arabia. We recognized we'd have to provide cars and drivers for those reps, and we'd have to very carefully carve out their territories. But that's something we were willing to do because we really were interested in that market, in women's health care. So if it's so critical for corporations to really become very fluid at cultural competency if you want to succeed in certain markets. So we make every effort to understand and to address needs of women or particular religious groups, whatever the need of the customer is, we will try to do what we need to do to address those in a culturally sensitive way that's very consistent with our credo beliefs.
I can even give you a military example, believe it or not, where in some of the countries the Australian Defence Force are in at the moment, there are some cultural issues that we need to be very sensitive to. And for example, in Afghanistan, we will often send out women soldiers to talk to the women in the villages because otherwise they feel quite threatened by the male soldiers. So even in the military, we can be sensitive sometimes.
Any other comments? Okay, we're about 5 minutes to the end of our session. Maybe we could take one more question.
Yeah, Trevor Miles from Canaxis. I'm hoping you're going to give me the prize for the one who's most supportive of the team, as opposed to most controversial. Just a little story. I studied chemical engineering. I was delighted by the fact that I walked into the chemical engineering group. There were 23 people, 13 of whom were women. I then went to a mechanical engineering class, and there was one woman in a class of about 300 people. So being that we're in supply chain management and we talk about demand-supply balancing, it's great that we're talking about getting to this point where there are fewer barriers to women, but I'm trying to look at the other side. Oops, sorry. How are we going to get the women to be interested in supply chain management? How are we going to get them interested in those mechanical, mathematical subjects? Because we've got 2 sons at university, one studying economics and one studying maths, and the number of women in their classes is minuscule. And yet, it's so important within the supply chain manufacturing environment.
I think you have to be innovative. I don't think you can rely simply on the system to provide that. The shift happens today really in the workforce and how you identify people that you send out to get developed and that you actively work on. As well as we have a very, very aggressive student recruitment program. We try and get them early. We get them out of the schools in physics, math, engineering, wherever. We try and make sure that our representation of young men to young women is about equal. We take them through the business and socialize them across the business in a cycle of 3 years. We recruit the best and the brightest, and we have a reputation for doing that. And we don't make them compete, other than through the process of their learning experience. They are taken into the business if they meet our criteria. So it's not passive, it's active, and it's getting people from supply chain organizations out to schools, to universities, to engagement opportunities where you can encourage, enlighten, and create a little passion, because a lot of kids today don't even know where to begin to think of their careers. There are so many choices. So, you know, it's outreach, it's development, it's teaching, you know.
One of the things that that we've noticed is we also see women being placed in specific pockets that may limit their opportunity to achieve maybe some of the roles that this particular panel has. You know, we've talked about women in quality versus women in operations, women in non-combat roles versus combat roles. We see some tendency to actually, in some cases, even if you can drive the representation at the lower levels, which certainly my company sees, it's how do you drive then to the key talent and into the promotional levels to reach these particular positions. And I think driving the right kinds of opportunities and not sort of putting maybe women in the safe, or what feels like might be a safer place, is pretty important. And I'll just, any comments? I know, Margaret, you've had some specific experience with this one.
Certainly not so much within the military, but with the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport in Australia, we have a program called Women Moving Forward, not neat play on words there, but mentoring the young women, and just I think it's about showing women and the young girls what's possible. When I was the Commandant of the Australian Defence Force Academy, we would get out into the schools, the girls' schools, because one of the other things, so it can be the military, supply chain, when key people who are assisting these girls make decisions, like their parents, like the people in charge of the schools, if they've not had experience in these fields, they're not going to recommend them to the girls. So it's very much about, I guess it falls on to us to get out there and show them what's possible. I mean, it was just amazing to see some of these young girls who not even thought that they could be in logistics in the military. And you mean I could do that? Is that possible? Of course it is. And then you can start showing them the pathway to make sure that they're competitive to enter.
So I'll thank you for that question. I see we have a couple more questions, and I think, John, we need to, we have other panels that are going to start. I will, Roddy, however, I will have to co-award. You and Genevieve will have to share the champagne, because I think she took the context of your question, I think, in a really good light. So let me first thank the audience for the fantastic questions, and mostly thank the panelists for your open dialogue with a round of applause, please.